Seth Jarvis has had one of the hottest starts of any player in the Eastern Conference so far this season, so we'll take the opportunity to wind back the clock to the 2020 NHL Draft to highlight some of the gems that were available in that class.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. I'm your host, Sebastian Hyde, the USA scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's episode, we're going to be kicking off a series here for this week where we'll be looking at every single draft between 2020 and 2025, the drafts that I personally have covered in my scouting work here, looking at some of the gems, where I had them ranked, what my impressions were, and where they are now. And we're going to be highlighting guys like Seth Jarvis, Brock Faber, J.J. Peterka, and Alex Nikishin, among a couple others here on today's episode. But before we dive into the entire show, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So we're going to be looking at two players in the first two segments each, and then three players in the final segment. So we've got a total of 7 guys that we're highlighting here. So of course, we can't talk about every single steal or slam dunk pick in this draft class, but please keep the conversation going in the comments down below, including about players that I didn't get to in this episode. But I really want to take a bit of a deep dive on each of these guys, so I'm limiting myself in terms of number of players to focus on. So in the first segment, we'll be looking at Seth Jarvis and J.J. Peterka, a pair of high motor, middle-driven, undersized forwards who have just made the NHL their own and are really, really taking the step to NHL stardom here in recent seasons. They will move on in the second segment to look at a pair of defensemen, Brock Faber, Calder candidate a year and a bit ago, as well as Ryker Evans, who actually went undrafted in this season. But because he was a player that was very much on my radar, that I had as an easy second-round caliber prospect, I'm just looping him in this episode rather than in the next show on the 2021 class. And then finally, we'll wrap things up with a trio of guys that are really breaking out here, especially in the last year and a half. And that's a Mason Lohrei of the Boston Bruins, Will Cuylle of the New York Rangers, and last but most certainly not least, Alexander Nikishin of the Carolina Hurricanes. So we've got a pair of Canes here on today's show, and overall a collection of very fun and also very different players in how they approach the game of hockey. So this should be a fun show. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode as we kick things off with one of my favorite players to watch, still in the NHL today, and most certainly in his draft year season, and that's Seth Jarvis, who ended up going 13th overall to the Carolina Hurricanes. I had him ranked exactly in that slot at 13th overall in that 2020 draft class, and with hindsight, both too low. I think that 13 is certainly on the low end of the range that he should have gone with the benefit of hindsight on our side. But a player whose strengths I don't think have really changed since he was a draft eligible talent. He's always been a player who outworks everybody on the ice. Just that intensity, the viciousness to get to the middle of the ice, but also just the speed, the pace, the playmaking intelligence. And what's really emerged for him in the National Hockey League has been the goal scoring skill. He's undersized, of course, 5'10" and 185 pounds as a right shot forward, mainly playing on the wing, but he can play down the middle as well in a pinch. Been a very consistent 67-point guy the last 2 seasons in Carolina, but this year is really taking a step with 7 goals and 11 points in 8 games to start the season. That puts him joint second in the league in goals this year, if I'm not mistaken. And he's just playing massive minutes. He's averaging well over 20 a night in Carolina. The chemistry he's built with Sebastian Aho is second to none. And he's just been on fire. He had a 2-goal, 23-point night against the Anaheim Ducks. His opening night performance against the New Jersey Devils this season was also another 2-goal performance. He's just been on fire. And overall, the impact he's able to make in all zones of the ice with just incessantly attacking and forcing defenders to think quickly and not make mistakes, because if you give him a single opening, he's going to punish you incredibly quickly. And that combination of playmaking and shooting skill is something that really sets this player apart. But it's that identity, the character, the snarl that he plays with that really, really kicks him to the next gear, both in the NHL and in his draft year campaign. He's a player I really did like a lot. Just to summarize some of my thoughts, when he was a draft eligible, I had him noted down as a dynamic top 6 forward in the making, who has a gravitational pull on defenders in terms of getting them out of position and playing through them and really exploring the space in behind that they vacate. And on top of that, really constantly being able to create and score in important moments. The handling skills always been a real area of strength as well. But really, I think the underrated aspect with him as a draft eligible were his puck protection mechanics. He's a small guy, but he is never bullied off the puck. He's such a solid base, a bit like Nick Suzuki with the Montreal Canadiens. Not the tallest guy in the world, but just really strong lower body, really, really good at using his legs to shield the puck from opposing sticks, and a guy that I just enjoy watching every single time I tune in to watch the Canes nowadays as well. So a player that's only gotten better and would be easily a top 10, if not top 5 or top 3 caliber guy in a redraft now. If you were to resort this draft class, I mean, I know I'd certainly pick him over some of the guys that I had ranked like top 7, like Lafreniere and Rossi and Perfetti. I think Jake Sanderson's in the mix there, up in the top 3 range as well. But there's just not many players, I think, that bring more value per shift in the National Hockey League today than Seth Jarvis. He's just able to do it all, and he raises his efficacy come playoff time. Next, we've got J.J. Peterka, who's been fantastic in his start to his career in Utah. Of course, had a breakout campaign last season with the Buffalo Sabres, scoring 27 goals and 68 points in 77 games. This season, up to 3 goals and 8 points already through 9 games in Utah, just off the back of a 3-assist night in St. Louis and a 1-goal performance in slightly more limited minutes against the Minnesota Wild on this very hot start for the Utah Mammoth. I like the team name as well. I'm a big fan of that, and I think that J.J. Peterka certainly plays like a mammoth despite not having a mammoth like size and frame to go alongside his game. 6 feet tall, 190 pounds, but he is all pace, and he's so versatile. You can play him so easily on the power play, penalty kill, 5-on-5. He can play down the middle if you need him to, but he's most effective on the wing. And Peterka fell all the way to the Buffalo Sabres at 34th overall. Of course, had that trade in this past offseason to Utah. And he was a player I liked quite a lot in his draft year season, even with a slight German bias, as I am half German. I speak the language fluently. I like seeing strong players coming out of the German system. I had him ranked 25th overall, which with hindsight, just like Seth Jarvis, is still a tad too low. I think he's easily a top 15 guy in a redraft at this stage, and certainly a slam dunk acquisition here for Utah. That playmaking skill, the incessant pace, he just brings this combination of tools that I think is just so dominant in the National Hockey League nowadays, especially among players that, like Seth Jarvis, lack the biggest frame to really facilitate a middle-driven style, but his feet are constantly moving. He's able to lower the shoulder, drive the middle lane, and I think that that's really going to be a storyline here for not just today's episode, but the entire string that we're going to do from 2020 all the way through 2025 of valuable players that dropped further than they should have and are just bringing tremendous value in the National Hockey League relative to their draft slots. There's a lot of guys here that are not the biggest. The big guys that excel are often drafted around the range that they should go. We have an exception here today with Will Cuylle, who definitely dropped further than he should have with hindsight. But a lot of these guys are on the smaller end, but very importantly, Do not play small. That is the key difference. Playing bigger than your size is an important part of the game when you are average size or under average size player in the National Hockey League, and playing in congested space in the middle of the ice, being able to really drag bigger opponents draped over your back while you're trying to get to the dangerous areas. And both Peterka and Seth Jarvis excel at these things while being able to punish opponents both through a quality release, but more importantly, extremely high-end playmaking and overall play connecting ability. That pace of thought and of feet just translates so perfectly to also elevate the playmaking style for these players. And I think they've certainly earned the cap hits that they're now earning. I mean, Seth Jarvis, of course, earning a decent penny in Carolina, and J.J. Peterka signing that new $7.7 million extension with the Utah Mammoth, paying him that pretty decent chunk every single season. But I think he's going to outperform that contract without too much of a concern, especially with that rising cap. But that wraps up this first segment for us today. In the next one, we're going to ask the question, how did Brock Faber fall so far on draft day? But first, we've got a quick message here from our sponsors at Locked On NHL Prospects. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the entire app. I love using FanDuel because it gives me so many different ways to play, whether it's player props, same game parlays, or even following the live lines during the game as the action is unfolding right in front of me. There really is just a massive amount of things to choose from. My personal favorite is certainly always the same game parlays, as they allow me to combine multiple predictions from different games into a single bet to maximize my potential winnings. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today to get started. All right, let's kick off the second segment here with Brock Faber of the Minnesota Wild, a player that was drafted by the LA Kings at 45th overall. He's an undersized defenseman at 6'1". He's now listed at 201 pounds as a right shot. And he was a player I had a lot of respect for in his draft year campaign, but just didn't swing hard enough on with hindsight. Like, he was a guy I had so much belief in, but I was looking around at the other rankings and was kind of convincing myself to drop him down my board. I think I would have liked to have him around the 25 range, and instead I dropped him all the way to 39, which is still higher than he got picked, but not by much, and not really a ranking I can gloat about with hindsight. But a player whose intelligence and runway was always just so appealing to me, right? Like, he's a player that was very young for his draft class, as an August 22nd birthday, and he was just the image of consistency and solidity with the NTDP in his draft year campaign. The production was never very flashy, right? Like, he had 12 points in 46 games with the NTDP in that season, and of course had a very big production year as he entered the NHL in his rookie year with the Minnesota Wild, scoring 47 points in 82 games. But last year was a bit more pedestrian with 29 points in 78, and this year a lot of the power play usage has just gone to Z Boyum instead, so he hasn't logged a point yet through 9 games. And at no point in his college career was Brock Faber a big-time producer. He never even flirted with a point-a-game production at the University of Minnesota, but still always a guy that kept improving, kept becoming more intelligent. The skating has always been a massive strength for this player. The defensive stick work just so detailed, constantly protecting the slot and angling big, fast, dynamic forwards to the boards with ease, and never giving up that middle. His ability to hold inside positioning has always been a massive area of strength with Faber. So a guy that I really loved watching this draft year campaign, and was certainly kind of surprised by a little bit that he was the player that LA let go in that Kevin Fiala deal. And I can certainly understand why Minnesota wanted to buy low on him a little bit. As a reminder, they got a first-round pick, which they used on Liam Ergren on top of Brock Faber in that transaction. And I mean, with every passing day, with all due respect to Fiala, who's a dynamic, talented scorer, that this trade's looking pretty nice for the Minnesota Wild. But I'd be very curious to ask you as well, like, what did it take until his rookie campaign in the National Hockey League for him to really jump out to you as a high-end young player in this league? Or did you also have perhaps that moment earlier in his career, whether it be in junior hockey or in college, where or maybe even at the Olympics for Team USA, where they won gold, and he played a decently large role on that lineup? What point was it that he really like stood out to you for the first time? I really like to hear your thoughts on this player specifically. But moving on, we've got a player that actually wasn't drafted in this draft class, and that's Ryker Evans, a player who went a year later in his re-entry season, but a guy that I loved so much already as a first-time draft eligible. He always was kind of like knocked for his average size frame at 6 feet, 192 pounds, not the biggest guy in the world, and he went undrafted in that season, but went 35th overall, the top of the second round in 2021. And he's a guy I liked a bunch in that draft eligible campaign, where he was playing with the Regina Pats, a team that was really struggling in that season. And I had him ranked 57th overall that year. So for a guy that I had ranked easily within the second round to go undrafted, that happened more towards the beginning of my scouting career than it does today. I align a bit more with consensus now than I used to. There was a bit more chaos to my rankings early on, but this was one that was certainly a hit, where everything I saw was just a very mobile, very effective transition defender with real upside as a puck mover, who just wasn't really given the opportunity to shine in that environment in Regina, because that team was rough in 2019, 2020. And his production obviously got knocked as a result. He had 31 points in 63 games that season, and just wasn't the flashiest guy. He had to play a bit more of a conservative style that campaign, but he's been terrific for the Seattle Kraken since coming into the National Hockey League. Had a 25-point season last year in his sophomore campaign with Seattle in 73 games, and unfortunately has missed the beginning to this season to injury. But a guy that I just see as a very projectable second pairing piece in the National Hockey League. And to get that in the second round a year later is great value. But when I do my practice of selecting players with the Montreal Canadiens draft picks every single draft, Ryker Evans was my 7th round draft pick that season, and that's one that has aged quite nicely in terms of a value pick. So that's one that I'm a bit proud of looking back, because the stick work was just so impressive to me. His ability to defend agile, dynamic skaters at speed, just like Brock Faber, in terms of, being smaller, but having all of the positional and stick details to compensate for that lacking, and still being able to layer in some snarl and some meanness at the net front to clear goaltender sight lines. I thought all of that was already there in his draft eligible campaign, but no NHL team took that swing. And I think quite a few are regretting that now with hindsight, because he might not be wasn't a Calder candidate by any stretch of the imagination, and he shouldn't be a top pairing guy on any contending lineup. But in terms of just a reliable, versatile second pairing piece, hey, I mean, for a guy that went undrafted in his first year of eligibility, I think that's pretty good value. But that wraps up this second segment for us. And the final one, we'll wrap up the show talking about Mason Lohrei, Will Cuylle, and Alexander Nikishin, a trio of guys that went in the second and third rounds that really, really should have gone in the first here, with the level of versatility and value and skill that they bring to the equation. And now they are all three full-timers in the National Hockey League. So we'll break down their games right after the break. All right, let's wrap up the show here as we talk about the last three players here from the 2020 draft class, of guys that were just gems. And I only really concentrated on the guys picked top 70, I think also partially because this was my first year venturing into scouting and having my own rankings that diverged from public discourse in certain ways. And I think that as such, I had a lot less eyes on the guys that were drafted later on in the draft class. And these are the ones that I also have a bit of context for, of where I stood on these players in their draft eligible seasons. But we're going to wrap things up here with all three guys being ones that I didn't watch much and I didn't have ranked high enough. So not players that I had like an inside lane on in terms of being high on before anyone else was by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly players that have helped me grow as a scout. And I hope that's also something that can be a takeaway for you all listening if you have any interest in doing your own like kind of like hobby scouting on the side or anything in between. And guys that I think were very valuable learning experiences for myself. And we'll start things off with Mason Lohrei, who was drafted to the Boston Bruins at 58th overall. I had him ranked as the last pick of the second round at 64. Actually, early third round. This was before Seattle came in to the National Hockey League, if I'm not mistaken. But he's a player that is just like a whole bunch of fun to watch with the Boston Bruins if you're not focusing too much on the mistakes, because there's definitely a big element of chaos still in Mason Lohrei's game. But that combination of mobility and stick work when he's at his best defensively and just puck moving skill that he brings to the equation is just a real difference-making factor as he's playing a second pairing role with the Boston Bruins. And he pairs that with a very big frame at 6'5" and 218 pounds. So a guy that I was too low on in his draft year. And I know that Boston Bruins fans, some have some gripes with watching him because there can definitely be like heart and mouth kind of moments that pop up with Mason Lohrei. I know they certainly did occur last season, but still that element of production from the blue line, like 5 goals, 33 points in 77 games was awesome last season. This year, he's already up to 6 points in 10, but you can't really gloss over the fact that he was a minus 43 last year. And plus minus, of course, contentious stat. I don't use it often here on the channel for a reason, but minus 43 has an indication of something, and he was certainly exploited in terms of the defensive decision-making last campaign. That's definitely still something he has to work on, but in terms of raw tools and upside and runway he still has in his game, I think there's still a lot of room to mature for this player. I think he's an exciting talent, and to get him in the late second round, I think was really, really good business there for the Boston Bruins. Then we've got Will Cuylle heading over to Madison Square Gardens in New York City, a player that put up 20 goals and 45 points last campaign with the Rangers. This year's only gotten 1 goal on the score sheet so far, but he's playing night in, night out, top 6 minutes. It's just been that it's been a tough start there for the Rangers so far this campaign, but he's a player that has really defined his strengths here in the National Hockey League. He's, of course, massive, right? At 6'3", 212. He's a really big customer, and they drafted him at 60th overall. And typically, big power forwards with pedigree, which he did have coming into his draft year campaign, even if the production wasn't fantastic that season, is definitely a guy that I think has solidified himself now as a valuable selection there in the 2020 draft class. And I think that his off-puck defensive habits have really grown since being selected. The forechecking value, his ability to just like smother players with his range. I don't think that the passing ability or playmaking is really a strength in his game, but just his ability to play the middle lane, plant himself at the net front, and have a quick release to punish defenders when a loose puck really like bounces in his favor. I think he's able to also tilt the ice in his team's favor in terms of creating chances, finishing chances that aren't the highest percentage plays as well from in tight. So definitely a guy that has a lot of value, and every team needs a player like him in the National Hockey League today. And the Rangers got him in the very late ends of the second round. But to wrap up the show here, we've got a player that is just year to year getting better and better and better, and is now finally making his debuts in the National Hockey League with the Carolina Hurricanes after being the captain with SKA St. Petersburg for 2 years running. You have a lot of photo shoots with him and Vladimir Putin that have made the rounds, because that is, of course, Putin's like favorite team, if I'm not mistaken, in the KHL. But Nikishin just dominant force there, scoring 17 goals in both of the last 2 seasons against some of the best men's competition outside the NHL today, and putting up massive point tallies with 56 and 46 respectively. And this season, he's already all the way up at 4 points in 8 games, and he's just been very slowly layered into the NHL. He was starting off playing 60 minutes a night. He's gotten a couple 20-minute games now at this stage in the National Hockey League. He's getting more and more trust from the coaching staff, and the way he plays, the mobility, the heavy shot from the blue line, the grit he plays with in his own end, and just like the puck moving ability he has in the breakout. He's such a versatile player that I think fits in with the Carolina Hurricanes identity so seamlessly, and a player that I just had ranked way too low. He was at 116 on my personal board, and he went 69th overall. So a guy that definitely the Hurricanes had an inside edge on, and they saw that value early on. They, of course, are never, ever, ever averse from drafting players out of Russia, and I think that Nikishin is their biggest slam dunk from that strategy so far in the last handful of years of applying it. And just year after year, it seems like half of their selections are Russian-based players. But I'd love to hear from you what your takeaways are from Nikishin as a rookie, especially if you are a Carolina Hurricanes fan. Do you think that he could end up being a bigger steal relative to draft position than Seth Jarvis, even though Seth Jarvis has taken that massive leap as being a dominant force on NHL first line already? And what do you see the ceiling as being here for Nikishin? I'd love to hear your insights. I've only watched a couple games of him in the National Hockey League so far, so I would really appreciate some comments about this player down below, because he's such a fascinating case study to me. And of course, leave any comments about any player I've talked about here today and any other guys I may have missed. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always greatly appreciated. And for your second listen, head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything you need to know to build yourself a competitive and sustainable fantasy roster. And I'm sure some of these guys have already turned into fantasy steals for some of you out there in the fantasy hockey scene. But that's it from me today. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I'm your host, Sebastian High, and I'll catch you listening again very, very soon.